Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. As the old adage goes, there's nothing that people won't do for the right amount of money. There's perhaps no better example of this cliché than in the case of murder for hire, the business of taking human life for cold hard cash. Often, we hear about these types of killings in relation to organized crime, but the truth is that there are plenty of examples in which average people have also found themselves hiring a hitman. Whether it's to get revenge on an ex, take out a business rival, or get out of an unhappy marriage without having to deal with divorce proceedings, contract killings seem to be an attractive option for the would-be murderer who either can't work up the courage to do it themselves or who wants to negate suspicions with a solid alibi. However, things don't always go according to plan, leading to the sometimes insane ways that these crimes are uncovered. Today, we wanted to take a look at a few examples of cases like this, focusing on murder-for-hire plots that we thought played out in truly ridiculous ways. Before we get to our list, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. With that out of the way, here are 5 totally wild murder-for-hire cases.
From the outside, Ramon and Maria Sosa's relationship looked like a happy one. The couple had married in 2009 and quickly started a life together in the Houston area. The pair even worked together at the 2 boxing gyms that Ramon owned, with Maria becoming a personal trainer at the second location in 2010. But on the inside, it was clear that cracks were developing in the marriage. Maria reportedly wanted nothing to do with her new stepchildren and attempted to estrange them from their father. When that failed, she also soured on Ramon and started claiming to friends that he was lazy and abusive. By 2015, the problems in their marriage had come to a head when Ramon noticed that money was disappearing from his gym's bank accounts. He learned shortly afterwards that his wife had used at least some of the money to secretly hire a divorce lawyer and was now levying domestic abuse claims. Though Ramon vehemently denied the accusations and was distraught over the situation, he figured that he had seen the worst of his wife's behavior. He continued to live in the house with Maria during their divorce proceedings, though the pair lived on separate floors. Sadly, Maria had even more sinister intentions. In June of 2015, she approached a former client at the boxing gym named Gustavo, asking him to set her up with a hitman. A month later, she met with the man's contact and agreed to give him $2,000 and a truck to kill her husband. The man asked whether she really wanted her husband dead or whether he could just beat him up. Maria insisted that it had to be murder. He agreed to the arrangement and told her he would go ahead with the hit and received $500 and some jewelry as a down payment. When the man came back a short time later with evidence that the job had been carried out, Maria was delighted. She was shown a photograph of Ramon lying in a shallow grave with a trickle of dried blood emanating from a gunshot wound to his temple. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until she was arrested at work the next day. It turned out that Ramon Sosa was very much alive and was part of an undercover operation to prove Maria was trying to have him murdered. The plan had started with Gustavo, who had immediately gone to Ramon after Maria approached him about being a hitman. The pair had taken the disturbing information to the police, but they were told they needed more. Gustavo agreed to keep meeting with Maria and recording their conversations so as not to arouse suspicion. Likewise, Ramon had agreed to continue living in the house and acting normally during the course of the investigation. The so-called hitman that Maria had paid to have her husband killed was actually an undercover officer. The macabre photo of Ramon's death was carefully staged to look as convincing as possible. After spending several months in jail, Maria eventually agreed to plead guilty in the case in exchange for a reduced charge. She was convicted of second-degree felony solicitation of capital murder and received a sentence of 20 years.
It's not uncommon to hear a parent say that they would do anything for their children. While the remark is often delivered in a sentimental fashion, underscoring a parent's unconditional love, in 1991, Wanda Holloway of Channelview, Texas, took that idea to the extreme. Holloway was known to be a nice enough woman to her friends and neighbors, though it was widely understood that she was possessed by a certain drive for money and status that she had lacked during her upbringing. This could be seen most plainly in her marriages, 2 of which failed before she finally settled down with a man 20 years her senior, who owned an oil field service company. There was nothing particularly wrong with her previous relationships, and she had even had 2 children with her first husband, but neither man was able to satiate her ambitious appetite. With this 3rd marriage, Holloway had finally gotten a taste of the wealth and status that she desired, allowing her to turn her attention to her children. In particular, Holloway became obsessed with getting her younger daughter Shayna involved in cheerleading, something she herself had always dreamed of doing but had been unable to during her own adolescent years. It was this desire to vicariously live out her cheerleading fantasy through her daughter that would ultimately be her undoing. The trouble started in 1989, when Shayna attempted to join the 7th grade cheerleading squad at the local junior high school. Holloway had even taken her daughter out of the private Christian school Shayna had been attending up until that point and enrolled her in the public middle school to ensure her eligibility. No expense was spared in the preparation for the tryouts. Like many girls in the competitive Texas cheerleading scene, Shayna had taken gymnastics and other classes to make sure she had the skills necessary to stand out, and her chances seemed good. Though the members of the cheerleading squad were elected by their fellow classmates, there were 2 spots open and only 2 girls in the running, making the vote somewhat of a formality. However, unbeknownst to Holloway, there would be a 3rd girl competing for a spot on the squad, another 7th grader named Amber Heath. Amber and Shayna knew each other from the Christian private school they had attended, but unlike Shayna, Amber was still attending that school and didn't plan to enroll with the public school until she had made the cheerleading squad. This was technically against the rules, but after Amber's mother Verna talked to the principal, an exception was made. Verna capped off the campaign to help her daughter by printing flyers and handing out candy to Amber's new classmates, encouraging them to vote for her daughter. The stunt was successful, and Amber made the cheerleading squad. Unfortunately, Shayna didn't. The decision infuriated Holloway, though her complaints fell on deaf ears. The next year, Holloway decided that to ensure her daughter's place on the cheerleading squad, she would also try her hand at bribery, handing out personalized rulers and pencils to students at Shayna's school to encourage them to vote for her. However, the school told Holloway she wasn't allowed to hand out the materials, and when she ignored them and did it anyway, Shayna was disqualified from trying out for cheerleading. Verna Heath was one of the parents who helped make the decision. After this second setback, Holloway was not only mortified, but her anger continued to grow against Verna and Amber Heath. She decided that when the high school tryouts came along the next year, the Heaths would not be around to compete. Holloway enlisted the help of her ex-brother-in-law, a man named Terry Harper. Harper had had constant legal troubles throughout his adult life, and Holloway figured that with his record, he could be paid off to take care of her problem. However, Harper was no killer. Disturbed by what Holloway had asked him to do, he went to police. They told Harper that the information alone wasn't enough, and that he would need to record conversations with Holloway before they could make any arrests. With the help of law enforcement, Harper negotiated a sum of money for the alleged assassinations, $2,500 for Verna and $5,000 for Amber. Holloway said the price was too high for both of them, and decided that killing Verna would be enough to accomplish her goal. She figured that with her mother dead, Amber would be too distraught to compete. On the day that Holloway went to give Terry the down payment for the murder, she was arrested. Unfortunately, the court proceedings against Holloway didn't go nearly as well as the investigation, and her first conviction was overturned when it was discovered that a member of the jury should have been ineligible to serve. At a second trial, Holloway pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She was ultimately released on March 1st, 1997, after spending just 6 months in prison.
In October of 2013, Chinese real estate developer named Tan Hui started to plan the murder of a business rival. The rival, whose last name was Wei, was a competing developer who had recently sued Tan's company in a dispute over a piece of property, and Tan wanted revenge. However, when all was said and done, the case would resemble more of a comedy routine than a genuine murder-for-hire plot. It all started when Tan reached out to a man named Ji Guanggan after he offered Ji 2 million Chinese yuan, or about $282,000 US, to kill Wei. Ji agreed, taking the money. Whether he intended to commit the murder and simply got cold feet is not clear. But what we know for sure is that at some point Ji decided that a better option was to subcontract the killing instead. Ji approached a man named Mo Chanxiang, offering him about half of what he'd been given by Tan to complete the job. At the same time, Ji went back to Tan to ask for another million yuan, which would have been paid upon the completion of the job, and bring Ji back to his original total. Mo accepted the contract killing, but like Ji, quickly set out to find another man to do the dirty work. Mo eventually made an agreement with a man named Yang Kensheng, who was given about 270,000 yuan up front and promised another 500,000 when he killed Wei. Just like the men before him, Yang agreed, pocketed some of the money, and continued to send the contract killing down the chain. He in turn made an agreement with another man, offering him $200,000 up front and $500,000 upon completion. This chain of ridiculous outsourcing continued for 6 months, until a fifth man named Ling Shanxi accepted the job for a measly 100,000 won, roughly 14,000 US. It was at this point that Ling had a different idea from his cohort of would-be hitmen. Rather than killing the target, Ling decided to approach Wei directly and offer to help him fake his death. Wei agreed to play along and allowed Ling to take some photos of him with his hands behind his back, suggesting that the hit had been carried out. But Wei wasn't an idiot. While Ling happily reported his success up the Russian doll-like series of contract killers, Wei went to police. All of the men were later arrested. The story finally broke in 2019 when a Chinese court sentenced Tan and his cold-footed accomplices. Tan received a sentence of 5 years in prison, while each of the 5 men who had taken money each received sentences ranging between 2 and 4 years. For many in China, the case drew amusing parallels to the construction and real estate development industries in the country. A commenter on Chinese social media platform Weibo commented that even killers understood the importance of contracting their work, with another user adding that this is the nature of business. Commentary on government corruption aside, the case certainly lacks no shortage of strangeness and is definitely one of the weirdest murder-for-hire stories we've come across.
When Valerie McDaniel met Leon Jacob in 2017, she was at a point in her life where she could really use a win. The 48-year-old Houston area veterinarian had spent 17 years in an extremely unhappy marriage, and since 2014 had been going through an equally tumultuous divorce. Not only was she in a bitter custody battle with her ex-husband Marion McDaniel over their young daughter, Valerie was forced to pay him over $1 million to buy him out of his share of her veterinary practice, and owed him even more money in the divorce settlement. Leon Jacob was introduced to Valerie through a neighbor in her luxury high-rise apartment building. Though she despised his cocky attitude at first and the fact that he was almost 9 years younger than her, the pair became romantically entangled quickly after. Just a short time after they met, Leon had moved into Valerie's apartment. They were even telling friends and family about their plans to be married. However, Leon brought his own problems to the relationship, ones that turned out to be far more than simple emotional baggage. He had also recently come out of a bad relationship, but it was one in which he was the aggressor. Not only had he stalked his ex-girlfriend, Megan Verikis, he was also being accused of assaulting her. Moreover, his 11-year marriage before this had ended in a similar way, with his ex-wife Annie Jacob saying that during their relationship he had treated her with, quote, extreme and repeated mental cruelty. Leon pleaded guilty to cyber-stalking Annie shortly after the marriage had broken up. But Leon's chief concern was never about how he had affected the women in his life. When he got together with Valerie, he instead commiserated with her about how his impending assault trial would affect his career prospects. Leon had tried for years to become a doctor, but had been kicked out of residency programs in several states for a general lack of knowledge and was viewed by his superiors as a danger to the lives of patients. If he was convicted of attacking Megan Verikis, he feared that his chances at obtaining a medical license would be ruined forever. Likewise, Valerie worried that her soon-to-be husband's record might hurt her in the legal battle with her ex for custody of her daughter. To Leon, the solution to their problem was obvious. He contacted a man he knew who went by the name Zach, figuring that the former Army veteran might be able to deal with his issue. Leon wanted Zach to prevent Megan from testifying against him in the assault case, and offered him $10,000 to kidnap her and try to convince her to drop the charges. Of course, if that didn't work, Leon told Zach that he should just make her disappear. Zach gladly took the money, but then promptly disappeared himself, forcing Leon to try and track him down through a mutual acquaintance. That acquaintance was Michael Kubosh, a Houston city councilman and bail bondsman who had posted bail for both Leon and Zach in the past. When Kubosh learned why Leon was so eager to locate Zach, he immediately went to police. When law enforcement got involved, they convinced Zach to cooperate with the investigation. He claimed that he had never actually intended to go through with the kidnapping and murder plot, and was simply milking Leon for money, and they believed him. Police had Zach introduce Leon and Valerie to an undercover officer who was posing as a hitman. However, by the time they started discussing the plot, Leon had raised the stakes. The couple now wanted Valerie's ex-husband killed in addition to the kidnapping of Megan Verikis. Leon reiterated the same thing he had told Zach about his ex-girlfriend to the undercover cop, saying that he didn't want Megan dead, but that if she refused to drop the charges after the kidnapping, he should make her disappear. With the help of the would-be murder victims, police staged elaborate photos to show to Leon and Valerie as proof that the job had been completed. After that, Leon paid the undercover officer an $1,800 installment for the job. Shortly after, both he and Valerie were arrested. They were charged with solicitation of capital murder. Though the intended victims of the crime were safe, the elaborate murder-for-hire plot would claim the life of one person in the end. 2 weeks after being released on bail, Valerie McDaniel jumped from the balcony of her 7th-floor apartment. The suicide happened the day before she was to appear in court. Before she took her life, Valerie made several recordings on her iPad, recounting her version of the story. She claimed that she was sorry about everything, and that she never wanted to hurt anyone. Leon, for his part, continued to protest his innocence. He was convicted of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder in March of 2018, receiving a life sentence. He will not be eligible for parole for 30 years.
By late 1988, Mary Ellen Samuels knew that her marriage was over. For the last 3 years, she and her husband Robert had been separated, and after many failed attempts at reconciliation, the couple seemed destined for divorce. But Mary also had a secret. She had decided that Robert was worth more to her dead than alive, and had come up with a plan to collect. If the divorce was finalized, Mary knew she would likely receive about $30,000. But if she were a widow, she would inherit $500,000, a combination of life insurance, money from the business they co-owned, and the value of their family home. On December 8th, Robert Samuels was found dead in his home in Northridge, Los Angeles, the result of a shotgun blast to the back of the head. Though Mary was immediately a suspect, there was no actual evidence linking her to the crime, and she received the full financial benefits of her husband's death. After getting her hands on the cash, she would go on a huge spending spree, blowing through all the money in less than a year. She spent lavishly on a new Porsche, trips to Mexico and Las Vegas, and custom outfits and fur coats. In a particularly damning photograph taken by one of Mary's new lovers, she posed nude on a bed in Cancun, her body covered in roughly $20,000 worth of $100 bills. At the same time that Mary hemorrhaged money, she failed to pay for basic bills, defaulting on her mortgage payments and running up huge unpaid debts at the business she inherited. She never even paid for a headstone for Robert's grave. When everything came crashing down just over a year later, Mary's antics earned her the nickname the Green Widow. It turned out that Mary had hired her daughter's fiancé, 27-year-old James Bernstein, to kill her husband. Though it is believed that Bernstein was not the actual gunman, he accepted the money and made sure the hit happened as planned. But after several months of flaunting her money and with police's suspicions about her involvement in Robert's death rising, Mary worried that Bernstein was a liability. She decided that she couldn't risk the chance of him cooperating with the investigation. So Mary decided to solve her problem the same way she did the last time she was in a jam and arranged to have Bernstein murdered. This time, however, she decided to hire a second hitman to assist with the job, paying $5,000 to 2 men named Paul Edward Gall and Daryl Ray Edwards. Gall and Edwards completed the job as promised, leaving Bernstein's strangled, lifeless body on an isolated section of road in June of 1989. Despite Mary's desperate attempt to save herself by silencing Bernstein, the discovery of his body only drew more suspicion when police discovered that he had been engaged to her daughter. Eventually, police tracked down Gall and Edwards, and they agreed to testify against Mary in exchange for lighter sentences. Mary was subsequently convicted in both murder cases and was sentenced to death. She was the 5th woman to receive the sentence since California had reinstated the death penalty in 1978. However, like many death row cases, Mary Ellen Samuels' case had been the subject of ongoing legal battles for decades. She is currently serving time at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla.
That brings us to the end of our list. Are there any other cases like this that you'd like us to consider for a future video? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thank you for watching.